Sarah stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror of her small bedroom. The wedding dress hung loose on her thin frame, borrowed from a neighbor who pitied her situation. At 22, she never imagined her life would come to this. Her father had died 3 months ago, leaving behind massive debts that crushed their family like a heavy stone. Her mother worked day and night as a seamstress, but the money barely covered their basic needs. The knock on the door made her stomach twist with anxiety. Mrs. Chen, the matchmaker, entered with a satisfied smile that didn't reach her eyes. Behind her stood Dr. Marcus Wellington, 35 years old and already known throughout the town for his cold demeanor and sharp tongue. He was tall with dark hair and calculating eyes that seemed to judge everything they saw. His expensive suit and polished shoes screamed wealth, but his expression showed no warmth whatsoever. Marcus barely glanced at Sarah as Mrs. Chen spoke about the arrangement. To him, this was simply a business transaction. He needed a wife to maintain his social standing in the medical community, and she needed someone to pay off her family's debts. Love was never mentioned in their brief conversation. Sarah's mother stood quietly in the corner, tears streaming down her weathered face, knowing she was sacrificing her daughter's happiness for their survival. The wedding ceremony was small and cold, held in the town's old courthouse. Sarah wore no smile as she repeated vows that felt empty and meaningless. Marcus spoke his lines with the same enthusiasm one might show when reading a grocery list. The few guests present could feel the tension in the air. There was no celebration, no joy, just two strangers binding themselves together out of necessity. After signing the papers, Marcus drove Sarah to his large house on the wealthy side of town. The silence in the car was deafening. Sarah watched familiar streets disappear behind them, knowing she was leaving her old life forever. The house was beautiful but felt as cold as a museum. Marcus showed her to a guest room, making it clear that their marriage was purely for appearances. He had his work, his reputation, and his schedule, and she was not to interfere with any of it. That first night, Sarah lay alone in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the grandfather clock tick in the hallway. She thought about her mother, now free from debt but alone in their old house. She thought about the dreams she once had of finding true love, of having a family filled with laughter and warmth. Instead, she was now Mrs. Wellington, wife to a man who treated her like an unwanted houseguest. The tears that came were silent but deep, carrying all her fears about the future that stretched ahead of her. The first month of marriage was like walking on broken glass. Marcus left for his clinic before dawn and returned after dark, barely acknowledging Sarah's presence. When he did speak, it was usually to criticize something she had done wrong. The coffee was too weak, the dinner too salty, or she had moved one of his medical journals from its exact position on his desk. Sarah learned to move quietly through the house, becoming invisible to avoid his sharp comments. Marcus had built his reputation as the town's most skilled doctor, but also its most difficult one. Patients came to him because he could diagnose conditions that others missed, but they left feeling small and judged. His success had made him proud and arrogant. He believed that everyone around him was less intelligent, less capable, and less worthy of respect. Sarah was just another person in his life who didn't meet his impossible standards. Sarah spent her days cleaning the already spotless house and reading books from Marcus's extensive library. She discovered his medical journals and found herself fascinated by the complexity of the human body and diseases. When Marcus caught her reading one evening, he snatched the journal away with obvious irritation. He told her that such complex material was beyond her understanding, and she should stick to simple novels instead. His words stung, but they also sparked something rebellious inside her. The loneliness was overwhelming. Sarah had no friends in this wealthy neighborhood, and Marcus made it clear that she was not to embarrass him with inappropriate behavior or friendships. She missed her mother terribly but was forbidden from visiting too often, as Marcus considered her old neighborhood beneath their social status. Sarah began to feel like a bird trapped in a golden cage, beautiful but completely without freedom. One evening, Marcus came home in an especially foul mood. A patient had questioned his diagnosis, and the hospital board had suggested he work on his bedside manner. He took his frustration out on Sarah, criticizing everything from her appearance to her background. He told her that she should be grateful for the comfortable life he provided, since without him she would be nothing but a poor girl from the wrong side of town. His words were like knives, cutting deep into her already wounded heart. That night, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She would not let Marcus break her spirit completely. She began to secretly continue reading his medical books, hiding them when she heard his car in the driveway. She started taking long walks around the neighborhood, slowly building her confidence and strength. She wrote letters to her mother, sharing her feelings and fears. Most importantly, she began to see that Marcus's cruelty came from his own deep unhappiness and insecurity. This realization didn't excuse his behavior, but it helped her understand that his treatment of her said more about him than it did about her worth as a person. Everything changed on a rainy Tuesday evening in October. Sarah was preparing dinner when she heard Marcus's car screech into the driveway much earlier than usual. When he walked through the door, she was shocked to see him pale and shaking, his usually perfect appearance disheveled and strange. His hands trembled as he loosened his tie, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool weather. For the first time since their wedding, Sarah saw him as something other than the cold, controlling man she had married. Marcus tried to maintain his usual distant demeanor, but Sarah could see something was terribly wrong. When she asked if he needed anything, he snapped at her to leave him alone, but his voice lacked its usual strength. He climbed the stairs to his study, but Sarah heard unusual sounds coming from the room. Against her better judgment, she followed him upstairs and found him collapsed in his chair, struggling to breathe properly. His medical degree and certificates hung on the wall behind him, but all his knowledge couldn't help him in that moment. The proud doctor who had always seemed invincible was having a panic attack. Sarah had read about them in his medical journals during her secret studying sessions. Without thinking about their complicated relationship, she knelt beside his chair and spoke in a calm, gentle voice. She guided him through breathing exercises she had learned from his own medical books, encouraging him to focus on her words rather than his racing thoughts. Slowly, his breathing returned to normal, and the color came back to his face. Marcus was humiliated that his wife had seen him in such a vulnerable state. He had spent years building an image of perfection and control, and now Sarah had witnessed him at his weakest moment. He expected her to use this against him somehow, or to lose respect for him completely. Instead, Sarah simply brought him a glass of water and sat quietly nearby until he felt better. She didn't ask questions or demand explanations. She just stayed, offering her presence as comfort without making him feel more exposed or embarrassed. Later that evening, Marcus found himself doing something he had never done before. He thanked Sarah for her help. The words felt strange in his mouth, as he was not used to expressing gratitude or admitting that he needed anyone. Sarah was surprised but responded with kindness, telling him that everyone needed help sometimes and there was no shame in accepting it. For the first time, they had a conversation that wasn't filled with criticism or coldness. That night, Marcus lay awake thinking about Sarah's gentle response to his crisis. He realized that despite months of his harsh treatment, she had chosen to help him when he was vulnerable. Most people in his life tolerated his difficult personality because of his professional status or wealth. But Sarah had shown him genuine human kindness when he needed it most. The experience planted a small seed of doubt about the way he had been treating her, though he wasn't ready to admit that his behavior had been wrong. Still, something had shifted between them, creating a tiny crack in the wall he had built around his heart. The weeks following Marcus's panic attack brought small but significant changes to their daily routine. He began coming home earlier and sometimes asked Sarah about her day, though the conversations were still awkward and brief. Sarah noticed that he watched her more carefully now, as if seeing her for the first time. She continued her secret medical reading, but now she felt more confident about her growing knowledge. When Marcus left medical journals on the kitchen table, she wondered if it was intentional. One evening, Marcus returned home with news that would test their fragile new understanding. The hospital had assigned him a difficult case involving a young pregnant woman, with complications that other doctors had failed to properly diagnose. The woman was poor, scared, and reminded Marcus uncomfortably of Sarah when they first met. The other doctors had dismissed the patient's concerns, assuming her symptoms were just normal pregnancy discomfort, but Marcus suspected something more serious was happening. Sarah overheard Marcus talking on the phone with his colleague about the case. The patient had symptoms that included severe headaches, vision problems, and swelling that seemed to be getting worse each day. When Marcus mentioned these details, Sarah remembered reading about preeclampsia in one of his medical textbooks. It was a dangerous condition that could threaten both mother and baby if not treated quickly. She hesitated, knowing that Marcus had previously dismissed her ability to understand medical concepts. But the woman's life might be at stake. Gathering her courage, Sarah approached Marcus in his study that evening. She knocked softly and waited for permission to enter, something that had become their unspoken rule. When she mentioned that she had overheard his phone conversation and suggested that the symptoms sounded like preeclampsia, Marcus's first instinct was to dismiss her opinion. However, something made him pause. Perhaps it was the memory of her kindness during his panic attack, or maybe it was the confidence in her voice as she spoke about the medical condition. Marcus found himself actually listening as Sarah explained what she had learned about preeclampsia from his medical books. She described the progression of symptoms and the potential dangers with an understanding that surprised him. When she finished speaking, Marcus realized that her suggestion aligned perfectly with his own growing suspicions about the case. For the first time in their marriage, he asked for her opinion rather than dismissing it. Sarah felt a spark of excitement as she realized that Marcus was finally seeing her as more than just an unwanted wife. The next day, Marcus examined the pregnant patient with Sarah's suggestion in mind. His tests confirmed that the woman was indeed suffering from severe preeclampsia and needed immediate treatment to save both her life and her baby's. The early diagnosis allowed for proper medical intervention, and both mother and child survived what could have been a tragic situation. That evening, Marcus came home with something he had never brought before, an admission that Sarah had been right and that her insight had potentially saved 2 lives. It was a small moment, but for Sarah, it felt like the first time her husband had truly seen her as an equal human being worthy of respect. The success with the preeclampsia case marked a turning point in Marcus and Sarah's relationship. Marcus began sharing more of his difficult cases with Sarah, initially just to test her knowledge, but gradually because he genuinely valued her perspective. Sarah's insights were often fresh and thoughtful, unencumbered by years of medical training that sometimes made Marcus overlook simple solutions. She had a natural empathy that helped her understand patient concerns in ways that Marcus's clinical approach sometimes missed. As winter approached, Marcus made an unexpected decision. He enrolled Sarah in evening classes at the local community college, telling her that if she was going to help him with medical cases, she should have proper education to support her natural intelligence. Sarah was overwhelmed with gratitude and excitement. For months, she had felt like her mind was starving for knowledge and purpose. The classes would give her a chance to learn properly, and maybe even pursue her own dreams of helping people through medicine. The evening classes brought new challenges and rewards. Sarah studied hard, often staying up late to complete assignments and prepare for exams. Marcus found himself helping her with difficult concepts, and these study sessions became some of their most peaceful times together. As he watched Sarah's dedication and intelligence flourish, Marcus began to see qualities in his wife that he had completely overlooked. She was not the simple, uneducated girl he had assumed her to be, but a bright, capable woman who had been held back by circumstances beyond her control. One cold December evening, Marcus came home to find Sarah crying over her textbooks at the kitchen table. She was struggling with a particularly difficult anatomy lesson and felt overwhelmed by how much she still didn't know. Instead of his usual impatience with displays of emotion, Marcus sat down beside her and gently explained the concepts she was finding confusing. His voice was softer than she had ever heard it, and his teaching was patient and encouraging rather than condescending. As Marcus helped Sarah with her studies that evening, something unexpected happened. He found himself telling her about his own struggles in medical school, the pressure he had felt to be perfect, and the loneliness that had driven him to become so cold and controlling. Sarah listened without judgment, offering comfort and understanding that Marcus had never experienced before. For the first time in years, he felt safe enough to be vulnerable with another person. The conversation continued late into the night, with both Marcus and Sarah sharing stories from their past that they had never told anyone. Marcus learned about Sarah's childhood dreams of becoming a nurse, which had been crushed by poverty and family obligations. Sarah heard about Marcus's difficult relationship with his demanding father, who had never shown approval no matter how much Marcus achieved. They discovered that both of them had built walls around their hearts to protect themselves from disappointment and pain. As they talked, those walls began to crumble, revealing two lonely people who had been searching for connection and understanding all along. By the time they finally went to bed that night, they were no longer strangers sharing a house, but two people beginning to discover that they might actually be able to heal each other's deepest wounds. Spring arrived with new possibilities that neither Marcus nor Sarah had imagined when they first married. Sarah had completed her first semester of classes with excellent grades, and Marcus had begun including her as his unofficial assistant on complex cases. Their professional partnership had grown into something deeper and more meaningful than either had expected. The cold, empty house had gradually become warm with conversation, shared meals, and quiet evenings spent studying together. The real test of their changing relationship came when Marcus faced a crisis that threatened his medical career. A wealthy patient's family accused him of misdiagnosis after their elderly father died, claiming that Marcus's arrogant attitude had prevented him from providing proper care. The hospital board launched an investigation, and Marcus's reputation was suddenly under attack. For the first time in his career, he faced the possibility of losing everything he had worked to build. Sarah watched her husband struggle with fear and self-doubt as the investigation proceeded. The proud, confident doctor she had married was replaced by a worried man who questioned every decision he had ever made. Instead of feeling satisfaction at seeing Marcus brought low, Sarah felt genuine concern for his pain. She had grown to understand that beneath his arrogant exterior was a man who had used success and control to hide his deep insecurities and fears of failure. During the darkest days of the investigation, Sarah became Marcus's strongest supporter. She helped him review old cases, organize his defense, and prepare his testimony. Her calm presence and unwavering belief in his abilities gave Marcus strength he didn't know he possessed. When colleagues avoided him and friends became distant, Sarah remained by his side, showing him the kind of loyalty he had never experienced before. For the first time in his life, Marcus understood what it meant to have someone who loved him for who he truly was, not just for his achievements or status. The investigation ultimately cleared Marcus of any wrongdoing, but the experience had changed him permanently. He returned to his practice with a new understanding of his patients' fears and vulnerabilities. His bedside manner improved dramatically as he learned to balance his medical expertise with genuine compassion. Sarah's influence had taught him that healing required more than just clinical knowledge. It demanded empathy, patience, and the ability to connect with people in their most difficult moments. 1 year after their cold, businesslike wedding, Marcus and Sarah chose to have a second ceremony. This time it was a celebration of real love, attended by friends who had watched their relationship transform from mutual tolerance to deep affection. Sarah had completed her first year of nursing school and was working part-time at Marcus's clinic, where patients loved her gentle care and understanding. As they exchanged new vows filled with promises of love, support, and partnership, both Marcus and Sarah realized that sometimes the most unexpected circumstances can lead to the most beautiful outcomes. The woman who had been forced into marriage to save her family had indeed found someone to heal her heart, just as she had unknowingly healed his. Their love story had begun with desperation and necessity, but it had grown into something genuine, lasting, and transformative for both of them.